And Shabbat Shalom. Greetings to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. This is the Shabbat teaching before the Passover. So prepare for the Passover, brethren. Greet one another in the chat. You still have time to register here. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, you can have a look in the link below, in the description below, or just head on over to the website. I do want to start out by just thanking so many of you for your financial support, for your stewardship and the donations to the ministry. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are so blessed for what Yahweh is doing. You can see just how much we're growing, and that's because people like you are tuning in. Subscribe right now. That really does help get us out more and let more eyes see this ministry. Again, so many people over the years have told me that it was because our teachings popped up on their recommended list, and that happens by you engaging, by either giving us a thumbs up or just subscribing to the ministry channel. So if you're here right now, please go ahead and do that. I'm taking a break today. You're taking a break today from Isaiah, the 5th Hebrew Gospel, because I triggered a few of you a few weeks ago when I spoke about my belief that the Messiah Yahusha would return at the end of the millennium. How can you say such a thing and then not give us any more? Was many of the responses that I got through email and some texts even. So I thought, well, yeah, that was a bit unfair, wasn't it? So today I'm going to delve into why I think that Yahusha's going to return at the end of the millennium, what that looks like, and then that might make you understand why I've been banging on about millennium technology and being so excitable at times about the prospect of us going into the millennium and, of course, the eventual downfall of Mystery Babylon. Because I think it's a literal event. I think I'm going to get to experience that. And sniffing around a little bit, I think it might happen here quite soon. Let's delve in together. All right. So, greetings and welcome. In Daniel, in the 12th chapter, in the 9th verse, it is written, "Go, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the end time." Do we live in the end times? I believe we do live in the end times. I also know that you and I have been called to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And life is a game of chess, brethren. And we need to be as kings. You don't answer questions. You ask the questions. As a king, by asking, you stay in honor and you can protect your queen. We've got to be asking and asking the questions. It says in the 25th chapter of Proverbs, Yahweh conceals a matter. Does he not? Yes. But we need to be asking in the scripture, asking through prayer, asking with our fellow brothers and sisters of the faith that Yahweh would reveal a matter to us because we would search it out. This is what the word teaches us in Mishlei Proverbs chapter 25. Also, the psalmist says that we're going to get a whole bunch of wisdom, and it's just going to be the beginning of wisdom if we would just humble ourselves and fear Yahweh. Because the fear of Yahweh is just the beginning path of you gaining some serious wisdom. And this world that hates the Creator, they are dumb. And they're dumbing each other down more and more and more. And you see that in the education or the de-education camps. So we have a duty. Now, the scripture does teach us about days and about years. In fact, in Ezekiel, in the 4th chapter, in the 6th verse, it is written, "Lie again on your right side, and you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days, a day for a year, a day for a year I have set on you." So, is it possible to interpret days as years when you're a scriptural student as we are? It also says in Hosea, in the 6th chapter, in the 2nd verse, "After 2 days he will bring us to life. In the 3rd day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight." Is that talking about literal days? Or is it talking about 2,000 years after Messiah's raised up, that he's going to raise up his people to rule for 1,000 years in the millennium? And how would he raise us up? He would have to raise us up out of the nations from where we have been scattered. All Israel has been scattered abroad, to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. We've got to come out of her, my people, so that we can go home to where we were promised something. And what were we promised? We were promised kingdom, dominion over the earth. And I don't want to abdicate that to a pre-tribulation rapture theology. I believe in kingdom rule and kingdom dominion because it was promised to us in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. That is why, foundationally, I see us walking into the millennium and millennium technology being a part of believers' rule and reign on this literal earth. Post-millennialism, the belief that Messiah will return after the 1,000 years. It's not something that's popularly taught because the mainstream funky monks for thousands of years have gone with this pre-millennium theology. Major premise of that is the misunderstanding of the book of Ezekiel and the prince in the book of Ezekiel. And we've done that and dealt with that when we've gone through the Ezekiel series, so I won't go too much into that. But the belief I have is that Yahushua will return after the millennia. Therefore, that means that us, as believers, we have a very strong role to play in reigning in this earth and bringing it under the dominion of Messiah before his return. That we're to be actively engaged with the culture. We're to be actively engaged in the world, but not of the world, to bring forth a force of change. And I believe that we can do that because I believe that Yahweh is doing that in his people today. Now, the premillennial return of Messiah that we've all been taught, if we have any church background, is the belief that Messiah will return before the millennium. Thus, he will bring everything under his dominion, and believers, well, you really don't have much to do at all. In fact, it would be just okay if you're in your Speedos and all of a sudden you get raptured and all that's left is your Speedos. That's okay, because you really don't have anything to do. You're just going to go to heaven. It's an abdication of personal responsibility of this earth. There's no dominion theology in that. There's no kingdom realm in that. It's he's going to do everything. He's done everything. We're just here to sit and wait until he comes in the sky and then we're raptured out of here. That is the whole premise. And then once we're raptured, we're going to be transformed and have this spiritual transformation of this earthly realm. It's all very mystical. It's all very mystical. But in Daniel, in the 12th chapter, in the 11th verse, this is what the scripture says. And this I was pondering as I was bringing forth this teaching. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the desolating abomination set up, 1,290 days shall occur. Now, we've just been looking a lot into the life of Nebuchadnezzar, because we've been in the book of Isaiah. And I was just thinking, when I read this, is it possible, based upon the few scriptures I've already given you in Daniel chapter 12, in Ezekiel 4, and in Hosea 6, and the Psalms and the Proverbs, is it possible that we could righteously, scripturally, interpret these days as years? I think we could we not? So let's just say that we've got 1,290 years. From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away and the abomination of desolation set up, we've got 1,290 years. So, is it possible, Matthew, that we could say, well, in 597 before the Common Era, bear with me, roll with me here, that Nebuchadnezzar took away the daily sacrifice? Could we go for that? Well, he certainly did. He did that, and the scripture records it in Melachim Bet, 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 10. So if that's the time marker, 597 before the Common Era, and we would account 1,290 years into the future, what abomination of desolation could have possibly happened, and what timeline would have that been? Well, that would lead you to 693 of the Common Era. What happened in 693 of the Common Era? Anybody? Anybody? The Dome of the Rock was set up on the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock was completed. That makes Israel's worship desolate. I've been up there many times. Last time I was up there, there was a little Islamic kid urinating in front of the IDF, and they did absolutely nothing up on that ground. So to say that it has made Israel's worship desolate, for sure and for certain. The State of Israel was established in 1948. They still can't get access to that area. Their worship is desolate. That is 1,290 years after the daily sacrifice was taken away. So bear with me more. Because now if we skip down to Daniel chapter 12, verse 12, blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. So now, let's say that is 1,335 years. Now, if we wait, now this is where my millennium theology, dominion theology, and being excited about millennium technology comes into play. So I'm just sharing with you my excitement, and I hope that you can just bear with me while I do that. Because I believe that if we now take 1,335 years from the abomination of the desolation in 693 of the Common Era, we will get the blessing in 2028 of the Common Era. The blessing will be bestowed. Is it possible that the blessing to be bestowed is that he is going to rescue us from the nations and bring us into the millennium? Is it possible? Well, we're going to have to wait. I'm not date setting here, but it's very clear to me that we are in the realm of the millennium. In the realm of the millennium. 600 and 93, the Dome of the Rock was completed. Plus 1,135 years to wait for the blessing brings us into 2028. The blessing will be bestowed. Is that possible? Is that probable? I'm hopeful. That's all I'm saying. It's not a thus saith the Lord. It's a thus thinketh Matthew possiblieth, excitablieth. You see, most scholars also do believe, and I think most of us would agree, that Yahushua was born around 4 before the Common Era, okay? Which means then that he would have been crucified at, approximately 33, which then most people would agree would be about 29 of the Common Era. Now, then if you go 2 days, Hosea 6 verse 2, you now move 2,000 years into the future. That brings you to when? Coincidentally, 2029, we're raised up out of mystery Babylon to go into the millennial land. And like I say, I'm not date setting. This is conjecture. This is theorizing. This is how I get excited. But I'm wondering and pondering these things as I read through the prophecies, as I get excited about the future, and I see things happening in this world, whether it was the terrible events that we all went through with your rights stripped away from you and people acquiescing to stupid in 2020, to now, the banking crisis yet again, and this whole just fiat system of just folly that is thrust upon us. I just see that we really cannot live passively. We need to be actively engaging and live an active faith rather than a passive faith. And I believe millennium, living in the millennium, is actively engaging. And some people will say, well, what do you mean? Does that mean that we get to walk from this world into the millennium, on this world, but then we won't live for long? Well, why not? We're going to have millennium technology. Methuselah lived for just short of 1,000 years. So yes, we can live all the way through the millennium in these bodies. Is that possible? Yes. There will be changes. There will be changes in water, food, nutrition, medicine, technology, maybe stem cell treatment. Who knows? I don't know. But all of these amazing technologies, because there won't be anything called the FDA, okay? There won't be anything called the CDC, okay? Getting in the way of all of the amazing technologies that are available. You won't have to go to Thailand to get some decent medical treatment. You won't have to go to Germany and Europe because they've banned it over. You won't have to go to South America to get it on cents on the dollar, what you can't get done here, because here all they do is drug you, cut you, and burn you. They use mustard gas on you. The very thing the Germans used in the trenches in World War I, they use on you when you go to the doctors here. It's called chemotherapy. It's mustard gas. This isn't modern technology. This is crazy land, and that's what we have available to us here. And everybody thinks it's great. Yeah, maybe if you're in a traffic accident, then it's a good thing to go to the doctors. But they are not healers. They mend things that are broke, but they are not healers. They are not healers. We need healers for us to be able to engage in this millennium technology. But I believe in a literal ruling, reigning, and dominion promises that were given to mankind in Genesis chapter 1:26. Whereas a premillennial return theology, I think, this is just my opinion, especially in the light of the abdication of responsibility of the church during COVID, where they acquiesced to stupid, shut their doors and did everything that the man told them to do, when we should have stood on our religious freedom That we have the right to worship, we have the right to congregate, and we have the right to get together as believers wherever and whenever we want to pray. And that cannot be inhibited or restricted. And I know it can't. But you see, what's happened is this premillennial return theology has caused Christians to retreat from the culture in anticipation of society's collapse, in anticipation of the rapture, in anticipation of the ruling and reigning with Yahusha in this mystical, millennial, spiritual heaven. So we find that something else has gone in this void, and it's humanism. Secular humanism has been sucked into the void. As Christians have moved out of the culture, secular, no pun intended there, right? Secular humanism, well, let's just call it what it is, sexual humanism, right? I mean, everything is all about this sexual agenda, isn't it? So I don't want to know. I was just trying to order a coffee. I really don't want to know. What has that got to do with my coffee? How did we even, right? I'm trying to buy a bloody coffee, and now I know what you do in this is insanity. It's everywhere. So yes, that was a Freudian slip, but a very good one, I think so myself, indeed. Christians have withdrawn from the culture, and because they have, is left a void of secular humanism, and atheism has gone into that void because they've been so focused on this mystical spiritual heaven, because there has been a leadership absence in the faith. The common belief inherited from traditional Christianity is that Yahusha will return to the earth for 1,000 years before its end. In contrast, if he returns at the end of the millennium, what is it possibly going to look like? Well, firstly, the question that people always ask me is, well, when's the tribulation? Well, what tribulation? I believe there's two tribulations. Because the tribulation is based upon a man, and that man's name is Yaakov, Jacob, and Jacob didn't have one tribulation. Jacob had two tribulations. It's called Yaakov's trouble. Yaakov's first trouble was when? When he met Esau, and he had to divide his house in two. Ephraim and Judah, the division of the tribes, to preserve his house. So I believe we're going to go through Jacob's first trouble, which is going to be a northern hemispheric economic collapse. I think you're seeing that getting lined up right now, which is going to cause a southern hemispheric collapse, which is going to be disease, war, and famine. Okay, and that then will bring about our exit from the nations. That's the first trouble, Jacob's first trouble. Jacob's second trouble is greater, the great tribulation. And of course, in Scripture, that's when the brothers come back and they show Jacob, your blessed son, Joseph, is dead. That was his great tribulation. I believe that's going to happen at the end of the 1,000-year reign, when Satan is released for a while before the coming of Yahusha. So you've got bookends of tribulation to establish the millennium. So, how do I think that will happen? I think we're going to see this social economic meltdown, which is going to lead to the cleansing of the land. Because that land over there needs a serious cleansing. In Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8, tells us that 2/3 will die and 1/3 will remain. Something's got to happen over in the Middle East, because right now, Tel Aviv is the gay capital of the Middle East. It's like San Francisco of the Middle East, but Dubai's catching up. No, it's not really, but, behind closed doors, I'm sure it is. Anyway, you're going to see this immigration and expansion of the land of biblical Israel. I think you're going to see this millennial reign, and like I say, the greater tribulation at its end. And the millennium will end with the second coming of Yahushua. Then after that, we have the resurrection of the dead, and then all living believers, those of us that have lived as long as Methuselah, because there be great water, drip feed irrigation, great agriculture. The dirt will be returned back to its Edenic glory. The fruits, the vegetables, the rain canopy. There won't be all this solar radiation. We're going to have all kinds of medical technologies. It'll be like Star Trek with none of the bad guys, okay? You'll be able to beam me up, Scotty, right? Yes. I mean, you'll be able to have all of that stuff. And I believe those technologies are available. In fact, I know many technologies are available to us. You just have to go out of the United States, because here we are CDC, FDA, and the people are dumb and stupid. I'm not saying you are. Of course, my wife gets very upset when I talk like this, but I'm saying most people are drinking the Kool-Aid, okay? They're drinking the Kool-Aid. Or the remdesivir. Good night. So there'll be the resurrection of the dead after the second coming of Yahushua at the end of the millennium, where all living believers are caught up to meet Yahushua in the air. All the Methuselah generation. All will be gathered before the great white throne judgment. Unbelievers, those that rebelled as Satan was released, and the great tribulation at the end of the millennium will be thrown into the lake of fire, and all unbelievers that have ever lived. Then what? The earth passes away, and there is the great day of judgment. And then when? Then we get a new heavens and a new earth. Because the new heavens and the new earth is supposed to be at Yahushua's second coming. So how does that work if we haven't had the millennium yet? You see, Christianity has chosen heaven over the land. That's the reality. People would rather believe that they die and go to heaven rather than inhabit the land and work together as the body of Mashiach. That's why there is such a massive support among Christians and John Hagee and the like to get the Jews, the so-called Jews, to go back to the land, because they don't think that's for the Christians. They don't think that's for the believers of Messiah. Well, that's for the Jews, the land. Well, hang on a minute. Read the Bible. No, it's for the whole house of Israel. But they don't think they're Israel, see? Because they're going to heaven. That's their land. But as Israel, all 12 tribes, that's our land. That was promised to us. That's the millennial land, brethren. We're going to escape these nations, be delivered from these nations as a whole house. Christianity doesn't want its inheritance, and it leaves it for the Jews, because it's been fooled into believing in a pre-tribulation rapture and floating around in heaven after death, instead of going to the grave to await the resurrection, or walking right into the millennium in these bodies and living a Methuselah life. I'm preparing for that. I'm going to the gym, I'm doing my pull-ups, I'm eating the fruits and veg. I mean, I'm ready for that. And if you're crippled, like you are, you're crippled, then don't worry about it. Because we will put you on a cart and haul your backside into the millennium, and there'll be some millennium technology for you, and you'll be healed just like that.
Thank you, Lord.
But even before the millennium, you can still be healed by the power of prayer. There are no cripples, except cripples of the mind. And the cripples of the mind are all out there advocating the silly nonsense that we see in the world today of strife and controversy, because they're crippled in the mind. I'm using all these politically incorrect terms because I can. In John chapter 3, verse 13, it says, "No one has ascended to heaven, not even my grandmother, not even my dad." How many funerals have you gone to? Oh, and you know the guy was a rotter. You know, he was just a rotter. Oh, and they're like, "Oh, yes, well, he's in heaven now." And you're like, really? Do you know where he was the night before he died? Do you know what he was slinging on the corner of the street? He's in heaven. Oh, okay. I can't take it. I'm not going to another one of those funerals. No one means no one has ascended to heaven, but he who has come down from heaven, Ben Adam, the Son of Man who is in heaven. Pretty succinct to me. So I hope to show you through a covenant approach to Scripture why a post-millennial return of Yahushua is what I believe. So a covenant approach to the millennium expects in history what Yahweh originally, intended for history. A covenant approach to millennium theology expects in history what Yahweh originally intended for history. And throughout Scripture, you see Yahweh working toward the accomplishment of his original purpose for the world and his original purpose for man. Man was created to be Yahweh's representative. We were created to be ruling under Yahweh and over the creation. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. The question every believer must ask himself is, has this mandate been annulled? Or is it still in force? I think it's still in force. I don't think it has been annulled. I don't see that it's been annulled anywhere in Scripture. And it certainly wasn't promised in the idea that we were going to fall. It was promised to believers. Because this was before the fall. So you can't say, oh yes, we've totally got the whole... No, that's the unbelievers. And they haven't got this world under control. They're absolutely messing it up with some very dangerous experiments that we have all been recipients of. Okay? The primary task of the second Adam, you and me, under his authority, the Melchizedek, is to fulfill this mandate through his priesthood, giving his priesthood dominion over all nations and all creation during the millennium. In creation, think about it. Why would Yahweh give up on history, which he began as saying was very good? Why would he give up on that? He made man in his image, and a fundamental aspect of that image is that man is given rule and to have dominion over all the earth, Genesis 1:26. Whereas dispensational theology has believers abandoning history. We're out of here. Rapture, off to heaven. Oh, Johnny died. He's in heaven. We've abandoned the mission. We've abandoned the charge. Abdicated responsibility for a mystical spiritual vision that doesn't exist except in the minds of funky monks. Dispensational theology has believers abandoning history, has believers abandoning his image, has believers abandoning it and choosing a rapture. Most before the tribulation, less after, but still abandoning nonetheless. But the Yahweh ordained impulse in man is to do what? Our impulse, our natural impulse is to create, is to build, is to create a culture, is to glorify Yahweh by righteous rule over it. I mean, Cain, he went out and he was like, I'm going to build a city. And Jabal, he's like, you know what? I'm going to be a cattle farmer. And Jabal creates the harp and the flute and develops music. And Tubal-Cain, he developed metallurgy and the creation of all of the metals. We've always been active participants in building a culture. Creating a culture is the expectation and anticipation of the post-millennial belief system. Post-millennialism is the very expectation that man will bring glory to his creator through the righteous development of culture and government and law. It's equity. And I'm not talking about this dumb stuff they're talking about. That's not I'm talking about equity, jurisprudence, the right dealings with man, between man, based upon the Torah. What is right, fitting, just, and honorable. It's decency. It's honor. It's integrity. We're not bound by the minutia of man's ideas or man's laws, because true law is unchanging. If it changes, it's not true. We're to have the equity of Solomon, which is wisdom, beginning in the fear of Yahweh. And that's how we rule and reign in the millennium. And I believe that Yahweh is developing the land for us. He is developing the tools for us. He is developing the people in every aspect of society, preparing the way, I'm getting tongue-tied, for us to go into this millennium expectation, to bring glory to Yahweh. I believe that premillennialism is to abandon our charge given back in Eden in Genesis 1:26, and I'm not going to abandon that charge. I want to return to Eden. I believe that's where we should return. This earth, although not the source of the kingdom, is part of the kingdom. The Melchizedek covenant, the Abrahamic covenant beginning with the oath in Genesis 12, continues, and the creational principle of universal glory to Yahweh and the redemptive power of Yahweh in history by nation building and national blessing. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Whereas we see now, with this post-millennial view, it anticipates all peoples on earth will be blessed through you, doesn't it? Because that's the millennial rule. Genesis 22 verse 17, your descendants will take possession of the gates of their enemies, the choke points, the canals, the waterways. We will take possession. That's what the Melchizedek covenant is all about, the conquest of all opposition that happens through a millennial rule with a post-millennial return. Why do you think Scripture says, he who denies that Yahusha came in the flesh is the spirit of anti-Messiah? Why does Scripture say that? Because Yahusha appeared in history to destroy Satan in history. It wasn't some spiritual concept. It happened in history. And we are a part of his story. We got to walk it out. Do you want to be the Methuselah generation? I do. I believe we can. I believe it's been destined to us. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 4 tells us this in Hebrews chapter 2 verse 14. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power over death. That is Satan. Satan. Now, is it the last generation that will get to actually see that? It would be a Methuselah generation that would never see death. I mean, if we go into the millennium and we stick another 900 odd years on you, you're good to go. Yep. Right? Yep. He's set. Yep. Your whole future is ahead of you.
That's right.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's right. That's right.
He came to mankind in historical form. Yeah. Not in a spiritual form. He came to mankind in a historical form, so that he might win through mankind's millennial rule in a historical victory. There's no abdication of the plot here, guys. It hasn't changed. It's kingdom, rule, and dominion theology from Genesis 1 all the way to the end. Isaiah, in the 55th chapter and the 11th verse, says this. So is my word that goes out of my mouth. It will not return to me void, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purposes for which I sent it, which is dominion, rule, and kingdom theology of the millennial rule. Promised Genesis 1:26. What does Yahweh desire? He desires you to become a great nation and a kingdom of priests. And what is Yahweh's purpose in your life? To bless you as the peoples of the earth. But this won't happen if you've got a vain imagination. The danger of premillennial thought is the misguided ideas that we should be looking for another covenant. Well, wouldn't that be a new covenant? So a new covenant is to be made with fleshly Israel and Judah as the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, instead of taking what Hebrews says at face value. Our eschatology must exalt who? Yahusha. It has to exalt, not the prince. The prince in Ezekiel is not Yahusha. It has to be consistent with Scripture. Isaiah, in the 46th chapter, in the 10th verse, it is written, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. In Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2, the mountain of Yahweh's house shall be established on the top of the mountains. We have yet to see that. In Isaiah 65 and Isaiah 66, the Messianic kingdom is fundamentally redemptive. Fundamentally redemptive. Its primary purpose is to redeem, to restore mankind and creation. And we can agree that it's during the course of these last days that the events prophesied will occur. But people go, well, when are the last days? Are they interpreted by some temporal millennial era? But the last days, brethren, we are in the last days. And I will say, thus saith the Lord. Yes, we are. Because Scripture says, so it's pretty safe for me to say that. The last days began with Yahusha. This view is opposed by ancient rabbinism, of course. Of course. Modern Judaism, of course, opposes it. Zionism opposes it. And Christian Zionism opposes it. Because they conceive these days beginning at a time far removed from the first century and relative to the state of Israel. Well, the last days began with the state of Israel in 1948. No. The last days began with Yahusha according to Le Bible. Acts chapter 2, verse 16. But this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. And it shall come to pass in the last days, said Elohim, that I will pour out my spirit, my ruach, on all flesh. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, on whom the end of the ages have come. And in Hebrews, this one's a real kicker, chapter 1, it says, Elohim, who at various times and in different ways spoke in past times of the fathers of the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, who he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds. Yahusha brought about the last days. And it says that within those last days there is a generation that won't see death. That's the Methuselah millennial generation. I believe that it is possible that we are on the very crux of that. I gave you the Daniel timeline, if you will, very briefly, taking days and turning them into years. From the taking away of the sacrifice by Nebuchadnezzar to the year count of the setup of the abomination that caused Israel's desolation, that it could not worship there. And then the count to the blessing that would come and lands in the year 2028. Are we ready for the millennium?
Yes.
Are we preparing for the millennium?
Yes.
Millennium theology, it is not clearly laid out because it's eschatology. And the Bible does remain for us to seek and search out a matter. But we are to be asking, as kings, what the Word says. And I'll leave you with this, because I'll do a part 2 and get into it a little bit more detail next week. In Hebrews chapter 9, verse 26, it is written, He then would have to suffer often since the foundation of the world, but now, once at the end of the ages. So back then, they believed they were at the end of the ages. He has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. The last days began with Yahusha. And in 3 days, 3,000 years, at the end of the second 1,000 years after his resurrection, he will raise you up from the land and bring you into the land. Raise you up from the nations, 2029, and bring you into the land. Is it possible? Is it probable? This is what I thinketh. And this is why I get so excitable. But I was teaching this 20-odd years ago, and it seems so long away. And now, and people are like, oh, we're never going to make it till 2028. It's all over in 2012. Well, first of all, it wasn't. It was all over in, when Prince was singing in 1999, right? It was like, all right, oh my goodness, Y2K, rice and beans. Nothing happened. How many times, okay? But that's all right. It's the refiner's fire. It's preparing. Yahweh is long-suffering. Think how many more people have come to the Mashiach in and since those days. So that is his mercy and that is his grace. May his mercy and his grace be upon you as you prepare for the Passover. Get that leaven of sin out of our lives. That's the greatest duty and the greatest call, to look inside the man, to refine and sharpen ourselves and to humble ourselves before our Creator and before our fellow man as we go into this season of Passover. But remember that these Moedim, these feasts, they are holy rehearsals, Mikra Kodesh. We are rehearsing for the millennium because we're going to be keeping the feasts in the millennium. We won't have to deal with any of this pagan nonsense. We won't have to listen to any of it. We will literally have the Moedim of Yahweh, the Shabbats of Yahweh, musical instruments and tambourines, and all of those heathen, they'll be out in the nations, and we'll just play around with the water switches just for kicks and giggles. Let's shut their water off. We'll be doing that, okay? No mercy. No, that'd be mercy, but it will be on millennium terms. They will have to come up to the feasts of Yahweh's to be able to get the blessings of the technology that we have. I believe Yahweh is preparing his people for that, and I am excited for a post-millennial return of Yahushua. Shabbat Shalom, and we'll catch you hopefully live next week.